What is going on, Only Playbook fans? We are back for another episode. This week, not so fun. We are doing regression or bust candidates heading into 2025. Pretty nuanced. It can mean a lot of things, right? Regression can mean if you just, if you were wide receiver 3 and you finish as wide receiver 4, technically that's regression, right? So it's really all about where you were, where you're being drafted currently. And so we have some candidates that we feel will regress in 2025 or maybe flat out bust. I don't know. So a lot to talk about. Not always the best episode, not the most fun episode, but it's necessary, man. We got some players potentially you want to avoid or maybe not draft where they're currently being drafted. But Shobit, how are you feeling going into this exercise?
Yeah, I just took a lot of stats and just changes that I've seen from the teams, along with it is where the stats from last year were they an outlier for any reasons, right? Touchdowns was target share just really high, an outlier from what we're used to seeing from these players, and that's kind of what I looked at to back it up. So I feel confident about it, but only time will tell truly, how it works. But I have enough backings and to prove my point, so I feel pretty good about it. What about you?
Yeah, similar. We talked off air about the guys we're talking about, and I understand why you brought up some of the guys that you're discussing, because like the thing you mentioned is it's one of the most valid regression stats is touchdowns, right? And so like if we're looking at guys that over corrected the natural mean of progression for their touchdowns, then naturally that's going to come down. And so, no, I think that's a good point. We'll dive into it, but I'll let you kick it off then. Give us your first regression guy.
Yeah, so my first regression guy will be Baker Mayfield, right? So 2024 finishes with like 4,500 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, which is career high, and 378 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns to complement that. And he finishes as a QB4, averaging 22.6 fantasy points per game. All great, but will he be able to reproduce that this year? I don't think so, right? So the outlook for what I'm thinking is 3,800 to 3,900 passing yards and a regression to 27 to 28 touchdowns for the season, which would rank him as a low-end quarterback 1, closer to QB 10 outcome, right? So some of the reasons, like we said, touchdown regression, I mean, that's the main thing. 41 touchdowns is a lot of touchdowns, and to be able to reproduce that for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who now do not have Liam Cohen as an offensive coordinator, there's going to be an adjusting period for them. They do have the firepower in the receiving core. They've got great guys. Evans is there. Godwin is there. And they also drafted Emeka Egbuka, Jalen McMillan. He's kind of coming up as well. But even with all that being said, I don't think that it's with a new offensive coordinator, will you be able to reproduce that? I don't think so, right? And his passing yards per attempt last year was good, 7.9, but his average throughout his career, 7.3 is what we typically see. So I think the passing yardage goes down, touchdowns go down. So that naturally means fantasy points will also go down.
Yeah, you make a good point. Anytime you have a new offensive coordinator coming into a season, especially on a team where, like you said, you're factoring in Baker Mayfield's greatest season that he's had thus far, right? So for us, if we're just numbers people, that's the outlier to what his normal season looks like. And so the variable that there's a completely brand new play caller in the fold now, that obviously has to factor into the equation. And I'm glad you brought up Baker, because my number one regression guy is actually his running back, Bucky Irving. So Bucky Irving it's an interesting situation, because last year Bucky Irving was a absolute smash, right? So completely cleared ADP, was probably the rookie running back of the year, took a stronghold on that starting position from Rachaad White. But a couple of things to think about. So last year he finished as RB14 in a half-point PPR. Now, he had games where he was splitting. He had games where he wasn't even touching the football 50% of the time. If you extrapolate his games in which he touched the ball over 50% of the time over a 17-period game, he would be RB9, and he finishes RB14, right? So even if you gave him everything, essentially, or as much as you can give him without it being 100%, he would have finished as RB9. So still, right around top 10. But if you look at his ADP so far going into this year, he's drafted right around RB6. So incredibly inflated for a guy. Couple things. He was amazing last year, but I don't think anybody expected him to be that his rookie year. He's also a 4th round drafted running back. So when running backs are drafted and they're not drafted incredibly high, there is nothing that gives anybody hope that from year over year, that running back's job is safe, right? I mean, unless you're paying luxury on this guy. You sign him to an extension, or he was a first round pick or a second round pick and you're paying him premium dollars. There's nothing really holding teams back from moving on or sharing the backfield, etc. So it's not like Bucky Irving came into the NFL as like, oh my God, this is Bijan. Like, we have to get him on the field. No, he just outproduced what everybody expected him to do. And he looked fantastic. So I'm not taking anything away from him, but let's look at 2025, right? Rachaad White still exists. He's still a thing. You talked about the biggest thing is they have a brand new offensive coordinator. One of the first things that their brand new offensive coordinator, Josh Gizzard, said in a press conference was that Rachaad White is a really good route runner. We all know he's really good with the ball in his hands on screen passes, drop back pass game. I don't want to compare him to a lot of other guys, but he is close to, if not as good as anybody we've seen in pass protection in the NFL. And that can... Giving somebody their props in pass protection is like a dagger in our hearts when it comes to fantasy football, right? Because what does that mean for that guy? Sick. He can protect the quarterback, but he's not going to get us any fantasy points. He's just going to be there on the field, taking away from potentially Bucky Irving being on the field and getting like a check down or something like that, right? So when you have the skill set of pass protection as a running back, you are automatically going to see the field. I talked about this with, I think Travion Henderson, I believe, for the Browns, like your rookie running back. But if your biggest skill set is you're an amazing pass protector, you're going to see the field. So pair that with the fact that Rachaad White is a good pass catcher. We already know that about him. That's where he excelled. That's where he caught a hell of passes the year before as well. So the reality is, if Bucky Irving repeats exactly what he did last year, he is going to he's still not going to outproduce where his current ADP sits. So like if he has a replicatable 2025, exactly what he did in 2024, you're still not drafting him for value. So I think regression is imminent for him. Again, offensive coordinator switches always scare me because it's so easy for one thing to be like, okay, like, let's say the first practice, Bucky Irving fumbles the football, right? And all of a sudden, brand new regime in the fold, and they're like, this is our experience so far with Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. We've seen somebody fumble. And how many times, Shovit, have we seen somebody fumble and all of a sudden, for right, wrong, or indifferent, they're in the coach's doghouse, if you will, right? And you're just like, what? Like, come on, man. People fumble all the time. So those are the things that I think about. Again, he's not somebody who was drafted in the first or second round. So there's no reason for the new offensive coordinator to be like, I need to get this guy the ball 300 times. He just needs to figure out what's going to work the best. And so I think, again, if we're picturing Bucky Irving's picture perfect season last year where he got most of the touches, he still would have finished as RB9. So I just think he's being overdrafted right now as RB6.
I agree with you. And in 2023, if you drafted Rachaad White, you later in the rounds, because nobody expected that, you benefited from that, right? And then last year, if you drafted Bucky Irving, where he was going a lot later, like 12 and maybe even the last pick of the draft, because Chad was there, and you benefited from that. And so now, with the 50-50 Chad and Bucky Irving being in the mix, like, it's just way too high, way too expensive. And I don't think it's a smart strategy if you draft him at his current ADP. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, RB6 is like almost like, if it's an RB heavy first round, he could go in the first round. But if you're extrapolating the receivers, that's a second round pick, right? And again, with a guy who could easily just not see the field consistently on third downs, even though he's a good pass catcher, it's just he's not Rachaad White. And so that becomes his Achilles heel right there. And again, you just can't. Can you? I don't think you can, but you can't take a risk on somebody that high in your draft, knowing that he's not even a full-fledged, like, 3-down workhorse.
Yeah. The only thing about that is if Chad gets hurt, Rachaad White gets hurt, then he becomes a workhorse running back. But, you can't bet on fantasy football that's not the strategy I would go with. So yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. So the next guy that I want to talk about is Scary Terry McLaurin. And he had an amazing season last year. And I think it's just going to be very difficult to repeat again. 2024 fantasy finish, he was finished as wide receiver 5, 82 receptions, 1,110 yards, and 13 touchdowns.
I was going to interrupt you before you even said the touchdowns. And you said wide receiver 5, and then you said 82 catches for like 1,100 yards. And I'm like, bruh, the math ain't mathin'. Like, how is 82 receptions and 1,100 yards equating to wide receiver 5?
Exactly. And that's the thing. And not only now you have another receiver that is an alpha receiver that will be in the mix, which is Deebo Samuel, traded to the Commanders, and which will increase competition. So that's not going to bode well for Terry McLaurin, because that's kind of his big selling point last year, right? He was the wide receiver 1. The other guys are who knows about them, right? So I think it's just going to be really difficult. 13 touchdowns again from him this year. I think the upside is limited there. His touchdowns per route was 2.4% per route, so which is 3 times more than 0.8% which is what we're more accustomed to seeing in his previous years, right? So I think that goes back to, regression closer to the mean. And his target share last year, believe it or not, was 23%, which ranked 37th among NFL receivers, despite finishing top 5 in fantasy rankings. Complement that with a sophomore year Jaden Daniels that I know Jaden Daniels looking like a good quarterback, but now there's more film on Jaden Daniels. It's going to make that offense a little bit more difficult to be able to get that same level of success that they had last year. So it's a little bit of a more risky play to go and draft Terry McLaurin as early in the drafts. So I think, for in this situation, don't chase the touchdowns, and I'm expecting a regression here.
Yeah, I mean, Deebo Samuel's MO is touching the ball in the red zone, especially on runs and stuff, right? So you have to assume naturally there will be some touchdowns that get taken away there. I mean, we watched all of last season, Shovit, and I think we were witnessing it live as it played out, the anomaly that was Terry McLaurin's season, right? I mean, every week it was like 60-yard bomb to McLaurin, touchdown, but he's catching like 3 other passes after that. And so the reality is, you're right. Could there be a really, really strong Jaden Daniels and TMC connection that they've built? Absolutely. But to think that they can just easily replicate that as bomb touchdown after bomb touchdown after bomb touchdown on the low volume that he's getting relative to every other receiver that's being drafted as like a top 15 or 20 receiver, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Could he obviously have another outlier season? Sure. But when we're projecting fantasy football over an entire season and over the next season, we can't bank on outliers. So I'm with you, man. I think he was a really, really obvious one, simply because, again, touchdowns, especially for a receiver as well, right? Like when we talk about touchdowns, sure, if you're like a Derrick Henry workhorse running back, maybe the regression isn't as drastic or dramatic, but when you're a receiver, like there's so many variables that have to come into play for the ball to even get put in your hands, let alone you put yourself in the end zone. So I'm with you, man. That's tough. 13 touchdowns, 80 catches and 13 touchdowns. I mean, those stats have to be like a record. Like I don't know anybody that's been catching that many touchdowns on that few of receptions. So I agree. All right, man, unpopular opinion, but I mean, it's not unpopular because it's like very, very factual. Then my next regression candidate is Saquon Barkley. I'm sorry, but I mean, it's in the numbers of fantasy football, so you can hate me for it if you want. Eagles fans can come at my throat if they want, but let's talk about Saquon Barkley, okay? 2024 RB1, obviously in half-point PPR. Currently, he's being drafted as running back 2, so everybody's expecting him to basically replicate what he did last year. So, and obviously, you and I have talked about this for years on end. We understand that when you're an RB1, the chances of you finishing and repeating as an RB1 are next to none, okay? Real quickly, let me just run through the running back shove it since 2015, who finished as running back 1, okay? 2015, Devontae Freeman, RB1. 2016, he finishes RB6. Slight drop-off. 2016, David Johnson, RB1. 2017, David Johnson was running back 115th. 2017, Todd Gurley, running back 1. 2018, Todd Gurley's a beast. He was running back 3, so slight drop-off. 2018, Barkley, the guy we're talking about, running back 1 in 2018. 2019, measly running back 10 for Saquon Barkley. 2019, CMC, RB1. What happened to 2020 CMC? Show it. RB54. Running back in 2020, because he was RB54, Kamara took the cake as RB1. Kamara in 2021, RB10. 2021 was Jonathan Taylor's year, breakout season. 2022, Jonathan Taylor, RB30. 2022, Austin Eckler catching 1 million passes, RB1. 2023, Austin Eckler catching not so many passes, RB28. 2023, CMC, again, he's back, second time on this list, RB1. What happened last year? Oh no, RB71, Shovit. So here's the moral of this story. When you're a young running back and you're getting hella touches, there's probably a chance that you can replicate, or at least to some extent, put together a repeatable performance in a season. But when you're a running back that is hitting a potential age cliff, the vaunted 27, 28 age cliff that is looming for Saquon Barkley, that's when fear starts to set in, okay? So 2 years ago, Warren Sharp put out this stat that running backs who touch the football 375 times or more have a 68% decrease, or 68% of them have a drop-off in yards and touchdowns the following year, right? So did you hear that? 375 touches as a running back. The following year, 68% of them have not only fewer yards, but also fewer touchdowns. And 78% of them average fewer touches. That seems to make like pretty basic common sense, right? You put a running back to the ground, naturally the next year you have to limit what you give him. Otherwise, he's going to get hurt. And that's what happened with the CMCs, with the Todd Gurleys, with the Ecklers, with the JTs, is the workload eventually got the best of them. So the following year, they couldn't produce because they got hurt. Whether it's 1 game, 2 games, the whole season, injury is imminent. That's something that can come. And here's another crazy stat, Shove it. 14% of Saquon Barkley's entire fantasy output last year came on 4 plays. Isn't that crazy? Is that not crazy to you? 14% of all of his fantasy points last year came on 4 plays. So yes, he had massive 75-yard touchdowns, 4 of those. And so that attributes to roughly 15% of everything he did for you last year. So those are things that, again, we talked about it, outliers. We can't just sit here and be like, I can't wait for Saquon to hit the 75-yard run. That's not realistic. That's an outlier. That's like him being legendary, right? And again, another year older, another year slower, maybe, another year of more tread on the tires. Like the idea that we can expect him to replicate that is just not feasible. And so I think naturally this is a year where even if Saquon Barkley finishes RB 4, 5, 6, 7 in the top 10, if you're drafting him as RB 2, there's a really good chance he's going to regress, especially from RB 1 last year.
This is the kind of take that scares me a lot, because if everyone's on board with this take, what happens is the top 5 guys don't draft Saquon Barkley, and then the 6th guy gets Saquon Barkley,
100%,
and then someone else that's great on their team. So it's and then the chances of him finishing RB 5 and up are still there. I get it, right? One is really hard to have a back-to-back season like that. I mean,
it just doesn't happen. Yeah.
It just doesn't happen, right? But when you start going how low do we go now? I mean, obviously, I think that Bijan Robinson and Gibbs are 2 guys ahead of him, but I would probably put Barkley right after that, despite the fact that the stats that you mentioned about the 4 plays. I still think nothing has changed from the Eagles' standpoint in terms of their offensive line, in terms of their the scheme that they run and the weapons that they have on the outside. The defenses still have to play the receivers. There's going to be less guys on the box, and all of that has to still be accounted for, where I still think he'll get his, but it's just a tough situation. It's a game theory of whether you don't draft him or the guy, the 5th and 6th, gets a better team. So it'll be interesting to see how that will play out.
That's the point you brought up there is one of the nuances in fantasy football that I don't think it gets talked about enough, right? It's really easy to be it's black and white, either you drafted a good team or you drafted a bad team. But think about that exact scenario that you just painted, right? We know as fantasy football players that the guy who finishes number 1, chances are he will not finish number 1 again. The chances tell you that it's just not going to happen, right? So that automatically rules out the guy who's taking the first running back potentially to take Saquon Barkley, right? I mean, if we're following the trend,
sure.
What that ends up starting to mean is that guy didn't pass on Barkley because he didn't like Saquon Barkley. That guy didn't pass on Barkley because he was doubting Saquon Barkley's talent or ability to play football. He passed on Saquon Barkley because statistically, the math tells you that same guy just cannot repeat that same success, right? So you have to live with that decision, which also means you have to live with the idea that every time you pass on him, somebody else passes on him, the person that inevitably ends up getting him is getting him at a value. And so that's the push and pull of drafting, right? The minute one guy passes on somebody and his ADP goes slightly below, all of a sudden, oh my God, he's value until somebody takes him. So you're right. All you can really do is try to construct your roster to the best of your abilities, right? It is really easy to be fixated and be like, fuck, I just passed on Saquon. Now Sasso's going to get Saquon. Now he's going to have 3 championships in a row. My life's ruined. It's so easy to fall into that hole, but you have to just stick to numbers and statistics and data that can back up your claims. Similar to this is, I love Saquon Barkley. He was on my team last year. I would love to have him again on that high flying, insane offense, but it just the world is telling me that if you draft him again this year, the chances of him doing exactly what he did last year just aren't there. And you're still having to draft him in the spot where you expect him to do exactly what he did last year.
Fair. I'm with you on that. And in line with being able to do what you did last year, let's talk about my next guy, James Cook. All right. He finished top 7 as a fantasy football finisher as far as running backs are concerned. 18 total touchdowns and 1,267 total scrimmage yards. So we're just gonna, bang on this touchdown regression, kind of logic that we're going with, and he might have the same number of yards, 1,200 yards is absolutely possible, but it's hard to imagine that 18 total touchdown season. There's another running back in the mix, Ray Davis. He's about 220 pounds, has like 30, 40 pounds over James Cook. So I could see him being utilized a little bit more in the red zone. And not only that, there's also Josh Allen, who's a vulture of his own team that will take some of the touchdowns that led James Cook to be successful last year. I think the odds of him securing that is very low. RB8 finish or higher. It's going to be difficult for him. And he averaged actually fewer snaps last year, 48% of snaps and 46% of rushing attempts than the previous year in 2023. Yep. So all of this to say, it's very unlikely that James Cook will finish RB8 or higher next year.
I agree with you. Who's going to be somebody I talked about if you hadn't? And the other aspect you can't ignore is he's in a current contract situation in which he's holding out. So we don't know what that means, right? Mm-hmm. And that whole contract thing actually made me think about one of my other points about Bucky Irving is Rachaad White's in a contract year, by the way. So you just know when a running back is in a contract year, there's much more incentive to show out and ball out so you can prove that you deserve a second contract. So beside the point, but yes, I agree with you. James Cook's situation is incredibly dicey. Ray Davis is a great running back, and the Bills have shown that they love Ty Johnson for whatever reason. Like, he will be there and he will play. 2-minute situations, they love Ty Johnson. I don't know why. So he is going to be there. Like you said, touchdowns it's a stat that you can't quantify year over year. So you cannot expect the same production, especially when you have a Josh Allen, especially when you have a quarterback that can just take off and run for touchdowns whenever he wants. That's something that makes it a lot trickier if you are a running back to get drafted. And yes, I think like his current ADP is probably like RB10 potentially. I think he's being drafted in the top 10 running backs. And I just don't think even workload doesn't warrant James Cook being a top 10 running back. Like, he just doesn't even demand that workload right now. So if he's not getting the workload, you just can't quite pull the trigger there. But I love the player, man. He's so talented. If they would just, I think we can all eat our own shit if we record this, hang up, and the immediate, like, Bill signed James Cook to a 3-year extension. At that point, we're good. Like, we can just forget all this. But till then, I do think there's some real validity to, they drafted Ray Davis, they use Ray Davis, they like Ray Davis, and Ray Davis has proven that he can get the job done. So the longer James Cook holds out, they're probably just like, fine, dude, we'll just deploy Ray Davis till you're ready to get back on the field. So I like it. My final regression candidate, man, I'm coming with all of the hot takes today, huh? My final regression candidate, it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Detroit Football Lions. Let's talk about it. Last year, Amon-Ra finishes wide receiver 3. Currently, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 4. Pretty in line, right? The last 2 years, actually, he's been wide receiver 3. So one could argue you're getting him as a discount. But there's a lot that's changed here. We've talked about it. We'll talk about it again. Offensive coordinator. Ben Johnson is no longer here. And Ben Johnson drove this wheel. He completely changed the offense of the Detroit Lions around, changed Jared Goff's outlook, changed Amon-Ra's outlook from pre-Ben Johnson to post-Ben Johnson. And so now he's gone, and you have a brand new offensive coordinator, which, again, you don't really know what you're going to expect. Amon-Ra, right? In 21 and 22, he had 5 touchdowns and 6 touchdowns. Ben Johnson gets there. He has 10 touchdowns and then 12 touchdowns. His receptions go from 90 to 106 to 119 to 115. He has 1,500 yards with Ben Johnson, and he had 900 and 1,100 without. So again, there was a massive increase in Amon-Ra's production, his usage, when Ben Johnson came onto the scene. Let's talk about Jared Goff. Jared Goff was somebody that, might I remind you, one of the best offensive minds in our lifetime, Sean McVay, passed up. He was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm over it. I think this is the most I can get. I want Matthew Stafford. So this is somebody in our time has already passed on. And so he was given, when he first came onto the scene, not Ben Johnson, right? So what did Jared Goff do naturally? 2019, Jared Goff, QB 13, 2020, QB 20, 2021, his first year with Detroit, QB 24. He threw 19 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, okay? Enter Ben Johnson. QB 24 to QB 10. 19 touchdowns to 29 touchdowns. Following year, QB 10 to QB 7, 29 touchdowns to 30 touchdowns. The following year, QB 7 to QB 6, 30 touchdowns to 37 touchdowns. So you can see every year that this guy got more and more comfortable in Ben Johnson's offense, his production increased. Well, Ben Johnson's no longer there. And it is impossible. And I think it's almost asinine for anybody to sit here and be like, the Lions offense will look the exact same that it did last year, because that's incredibly stupid to think. They have a brand new person calling the plays. And if he was able to just be Ben Johnson, then maybe Ben Johnson wouldn't have been such a big candidate for a head coaching job, because somebody else can basically replicate the same plays he does. And that's not the case. So I think there is a world where this entire Lions offense is going to have to find another identity now that Ben Johnson is no longer there. So I don't know that this offense is going to look as holy shit, they can't be stopped type juggernaut as they have the last 2 seasons. And I think that's going to start with Jared Goff. Brand new system. You're going to have to learn a brand new system. That's never easy. And again, pair that with the fact that Amon-Ra St. Brown, while being a great receiver, never reached that next level without Ben Johnson. Now he's gone. So I just think the numbers tell you first year is the natural year for this adjustment to take place. So all of these guys have the ability to regress in this first year with the new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. When you take a look at the top 10, top 11 receivers that are going in there, the scariest option is absolutely Amon-Ra St. Brown, 100%. Right?
And you look at the guys after him now that are younger, and doesn't like you see those names and you're like, man, I want to draft this guy over Amon-Ra St. Brown in 2025.
Right.
There's so many of those guys.
You got Puka Nacua, you got Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins now, right?
Oh yeah.
And up and coming Brian Thomas in this Liam Cohen offense, right? So there's just so many guys out there that you can feel a little bit better about and you just have so much uncertainty with the fact that Ben Johnson isn't there. I don't even know what this offense is going to look like, and it's
no
tough
idea, man.
To bank on wide receiver for Amon-Ra St. Brown right now.
The thing is, even if he gets all of his catches, the touchdowns are what scares me. Like again, we talked about touchdown regression. Less for a running back, but more for a receiver. It's just so much harder for a receiver to replicate the touchdown success from previous years. And so, I don't know, man. I think regression is imminent. But the other thing you have to factor in is Amon-Ra is not a typical play on the outside receiver that it's like, hey man, we don't have a play design here. I'm just gonna go deep, just throw me the football. Well, you can look at all those top 10 guys, shove it, and every single one of them, you could probably throw a jump ball to them and be like, you know what, I trust this guy. And like, push comes to shove, I can try to get this guy the football. You don't have those same feelings with Amon-Ra St. Brown because the style of football that he plays is just completely different.
Well, that's where it might get a little bit different, right? That's where if you're playing PPR, you know that the targets will probably still come his way.
100%.
So there's definitely that upside, but the touchdown upside is absolutely with their offense was just so dynamic, and I don't know if you'll see that again, and that will be a reason for regression as well.
Yeah, and even if we do see it, even if let's say like they just they can just pick up right where they left off, you have to assume that there's like even a week or a couple of weeks, there's got to be an adjustment period, right? So naturally, there's going to be a little bit of a lull in the Lions from the end of last year to immediately week 1. I just don't think they're going to come out guns blazing like they did to finish the season.
Yep. Agreed.
There it is, man. Contradiction, regression, controversy. What do you guys think? Am I just completely out of my mind with some of these big names regressing, or is it just make sense based on the numbers? I mean, I don't know. You tell us. Any other players that you thought about during this exercise that were worth mentioning?
I'm exploring the Derrick Henry thing. I feel like the age issue with Derrick Henry is certainly of a concern, and I think that they might be a little bit RB by committee just because of just trying to prolong his duration of 17 weeks and then the playoffs. So just naturally, I feel like his usage might go down, which worries me a little bit. But the guy's also a tank, so I don't know what to make of it. I think slight regression, but still elite numbers.
Yeah, he's somebody that I think we can put in the bin of outlier. We talked about outliers a lot, and I think me personally had been waiting for his regression for like the past 4 years. I think in like 2020 when it was him, he was hitting like age 27. I was like, this is the year, man. This is the year where running backs start to regress. And look at all the tread on Derrick Henry's tires. He's been run to the ground. He's been their whole offense. And for whatever reason, dude, even if the guy's on the field like 45% of the game, he's still incredible. And so I think the pairing with Lamar Jackson is the biggest aspect of his game that I think prolongs his career. Is the minute you ignore Derrick Henry, he's going to beat you. But the minute you hone in on Derrick Henry, Lamar's going to beat you. And so there's just not a way to win or beat that offense, if you will, when you're picking one or the other. But I'm with you. I had the same thoughts. I was like, is this the year I finally put it on ink? But I didn't do it, man. You just can't doubt some of these outliers, and I'm doing it totally with Barkley and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But Derrick Henry has proven longer that, again, the cliff just hasn't come for him. And he's given us 3-4 years now where it could have came, but it hasn't. So props to him. But you're right. I think he was another guy that I had thought about as well. But That's it, folks. That is the episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're watching, hit the like, hit the subscribe. It helps spread the word about this awesome podcast that you listen to. Instagram, socials, Twitter, TikTok, at The Only Playbook. I'm Sweetcard. That is my Twitter. Actually, it's not there. Let me just do this real quick.
There you go. Oh, no, there it is.
Oh, we'll do this. Hold on. I thought I had, there it is. This is the one I meant to do. I'm Sweetcard. That is my Twitter. That's Shobit. That is his Twitter. We are The Only Playbook. We will be back next week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.